Arctic melts, the Arctic ice during the summer melts, it has an effect directly on the Indian summer monsoon. And because of the Indian summer monsoon increasing in nature, the warmth and the warm air that is consolidated in the tropics actually does travel back to the Arctic and melts the ice further. Right? So that is the science. That is the science behind why I am discussing what I am discussing today. So why is the Arctic important at all for climate stabilization? It firstly provides both a tipping point as well as a feedback mechanism. A tipping point is basically once you go past a certain point, it's not going to be sustainable for a long term. It also provides a feedback mechanism to the world, right? Just as the Amazon rainforest is a feedback mechanism for the world, and how it is doing is a feedback mechanism to the world. The Arctic also is a feedback mechanism to the world. A lot of research has been done on how the Arctic sort of affects not just the polar region, but also maybe a little bit southern. But no research, or actually not that much research has been done on how it affects the tropics, right? And that is what the study, or that is what I am going to be discussing today. The few studies that exist talk about the vicious cycle that I just spoke about a few seconds ago. Now, it is important for the Arctic to be preserved because it provides for a great wide shade, right? The sun reflects if there is a good ice cover. However, if the ice cover sort of substantially reduces, which it has, I think, at the rate of 43% in the past 20 odd years, and by the next 10 to 15 years, there will be an ice-free summer in the Arctic in the September month, which is the summer in the Arctic, right? In the next 10-15 years, we're looking at an ice-free Arctic summer, which is in the month of September. There, the ice will actually relatively melt. Not the entire ice, but the ice that sort of melts and reforms. That ice will completely melt away in the next 10 to 15 years. So the summer portion will have no ice remaining in the Arctic region, which is why it becomes even more important for us to start talking about it now. Because like we all know in the climate world, the steps we take today will face or will form the generations to come. So what impact it has on the Indian summer monsoon, and why is that important? Firstly, I'm not talking about the Indian summer monsoon only in a specific region. I mean the entire Indian summer monsoon that originates from the south and goes towards the north, right? So the entire impact, firstly, India itself is a rain-fed nation. Most of the agricultural activity and agrarian economy depends on rain as the primary source for cultivation. So this is why it's important to not only monitor, but also work on mitigation and adaptation strategies for the future. As we've seen in the last 2 years, if not even more, I'm not even going back years. In the last 2 years, there's been wide-scale destruction, not just in India, but also in Pakistan. And it is because of this particular feedback mechanism that we're seeing in the Arctic. So it is important to relate and correlate the interpolar region with the third pole region. And that's why it becomes more and more important to look at what we can do further. Now, apart from that, the World Bank says that just trying to adapt to climate change may cost, or just trying to mitigate any losses, we will cost ourselves to 0.8% of the GDP in the Indian economy, which I think is a lot of resources going down the drain for something that we can actually, the steps that we can take as of now, right? So why is this important in the context of India? Is because of the socioeconomic vulnerabilities, and as my colleague also talked about, the anthropocentricity of what we have been doing with climate change is also important. Now, socioeconomic vulnerabilities often get enhanced because of climate change, right? Either they're not able to mitigate climate change well in time, and the ones who are able to adapt to climate change are often the ones who are able to adapt to climate change are often the kind of people who do not have to face the brunt of climate change. So it basically impacts the people who are socio-economically more vulnerable even more, right? like I said, again, it's a vicious cycle. You can't climb out of that vulnerability once you are sinking into it. Right now, taking a little bit of a cue with Dr. Akhilesh Gupta's presentation in the morning, who talked about district-wide vulnerability indexes. And he did a study, and they have done a study, the government of India has done a very exhaustive study on mapping how vulnerable certain districts are, how vulnerable certain states are. So, which is why we have to have a district-specific as well as a subnational approach to figure out what climate change can mean. While we might have extreme monsoons in the north and the western region of the country as well as the southern region, the eastern region, however, may face severe drought-like conditions, which is completely contrary. So we can't have a national strategy to adapt to these climate changes. We need not only a subnational level, but we need a district level approach to how do you actually combat climate change vulnerabilities. And like I said, it's very, very widespread and it's very distinguished from each other. One would not assume that the eastern states would be very drought prone, but the eastern states are the ones which may be drought prone simply because of the Indian summer monsoons targeting towards the northern and the western side of the country. Now, how can India play a role in the Arctic? Right? Firstly, we are an observer state in the Arctic Council. I know it's on pause, but when it was not on pause, we were actively engaging with the Arctic Council. We were trying to start certain science and exploration in the Arctic through collaborative efforts with Russia as well as China. And we still are in the ongoing process since we can't approach the Arctic Council since like we recently heard that it is on pause. Now, India, this is something that nobody knows, like not a lot of people know about, which is the India actually has an Arctic specific policy. And this document was floated in 2022. And this policy targets not just how we can engage as a member state of the Arctic Council, but it talks about how you can engage in resource exploration as well, in looking at renewable sources of energy in the Arctic, how looking at the trade and the North Sea route becoming more available, so how India can play an active role in that as well. Right? So it's actually a very exhaustive 27-page document. So if you ever want to go through something in your nighttime reading, I think that's a great way to step forward from this particular, at least, conference. I think, so that's one thing that we are taking into account is how to adapt to the fact that we are not actually an active member of the Arctic Council. So we are forming collaborations with other countries who are more prevalent, who are more active in the Arctic, like Russia, like China. I'm not agreeing, not disagreeing, not going into the geopolitics of whether it should be done that way or not, but we are taking an active interest in the Arctic region. We are also conducting exhaustive scientific research and scientific studies to explore the teleconnections, the vicious cycle that I was talking about, how it impacts the Indian summer monsoon and vice versa. We are taking it into account. We are also actually using ISRO to take into account some of the vulnerabilities that India might be able to face. We are trying to engage ISRO as a satellite communication network to explore the Arctic even more. So we are adapting to how the Arctic is actually affecting the summer monsoon in India. And like I said, not only food but life. I think everybody is well aware of the effects of climate change. It deals with just life, livelihood, food, shelter, clothing, not just food, right? Because food, you can directly correlate it with the monsoon, you can directly correlate it with agriculture, and you can directly correlate it with cultivation. But something that's not mostly talking about is like the loss of life and livelihood that will also come with this. Now, these are some of the suggestions that I could come up with. That while we have Indian Arctic policy, what it focuses on is how to exploit resources in the Arctic, which may be very antithetical to climate change. Right? We are talking about exploring a North Sea route, which might get open up simply because the Arctic ice is melting. But that's very, very contradictory to what India should be looking at. We should be looking at sustaining the Arctic, not looking at alternative sea routes that may impact our economic as well as trade relations with those nations, right? So that's one thing that I definitely thought of flagging. It's not maybe on the slide per se, but it's something that I have noticed. Obviously, please cut down emissions, but not just the CO2 emissions, which we all talk about, but something called the SLCPs, the short-lived climate pollutants. There are 4 in nature: black carbon, which has a direct impact on the Arctic because of this nature of black carbon. It will absorb more heat, which means it will be more susceptible to melting, right? So taking adaptation strategies and mitigation strategies to curb SLCPs will result in bigger changes in a smaller period of time. I think reducing CO2 is a good long game, but SLCPs might be something that we can target in the next 10 to 15 years, which is where we're looking at the loss of Arctic sea ice in the summer. Also, India should get a seat at the table when the Arctic Council actually eventually resumes. And we should not wait for the Arctic Council to resume, in fact, or wait for Russia to cease its invasion of the Ukraine for it to gain, but we should also engage simultaneously with the Arctic nations. India recently, I don't know if you are aware, Prime Minister Modi had just recently gone to France, and French and the Indian government came up with an Arctic specific policy, exactly targeting that, and France as well as India are observer states. So like I said, these nations which are also facing the brunt of climate change, especially due to the Arctic amplification, which I think one of the speakers earlier also mentioned, is heating 4 times the global average, which means not at 1.5 rate, but much more, right? So take into account the people who are facing, or the countries who are facing, the brunt of climate change because of Arctic sea ice being melted. And obviously you should have active policies that deal with stopping or curbing not just militarization but also resource exploitation, because resource exploitation eventually leads to catastrophic changes, as we are seeing right now. Like I have already mentioned ISRO's rules, I don't think I need to go through that again. Thank you. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. I'm sorry if it seems like a repetition from the morning.